Almost a quarter of the world's population live just over there. Britain's colonial border with China, a nation now rejoining the world after locking itself away for decades like some malevolent Shangri-La. In these mellowing days of ping-pong diplomacy, President Nixon, a few businessmen and tourists pass into the interior, and Chinese leaders go to the UN. But thousands of China's millions still want out, still risk their lives to go where no one cares what Chairman Mao thinks. There's the country lane between China and the rest of the world. The muddy Samchum River marks a border 23 miles long. A Bailey Bridge, a red flag, a white guardhouse, a solitary, rumpled guard. This is the Eastern Berlin Wall. In this pastoral setting, its peace shattered only by loudspeakers spreading Mao's thoughts in Mandarin to disinterested peasants who speak only Cantonese, here East and West come face to face. Hong Kong provides China with 2/3 of its foreign earnings, and some of the goods bought for sterling arrive here on foot. Food supplies for the colony's 4 million, livestock and fresh vegetables cross the Mankamto Bridge. At the front edge of no man's land, the police posts a blockhouse like a medieval fort where Senior Superintendent Stanley Flower's men watch out for any so-called illegals.
Very few would try to cross here, of course, because there are very few points at which they could cross easily.
Now, where do they cross by land?
Well, of course, if it was absolutely clear, we'd be able to anticipate them. But in general, they tend to come up to this large mountain you see over here, called China Mountain. And they probably hide in the hills during the daytime and then attempt to get across at night.
They'd be most worried about their own soldiers, obviously. What would you do if you intercepted anyone?
If we find them, we do, in fact, arrest them.
But for humanitarian reasons, you wouldn't turn them back, or...?
Well, humanitarian reasons and practical reasons, we wouldn't turn them back here.
Legals cross the railway bridge here at Lawu. A few businessmen, some shepherded tourists, change trains and walk into China. Hong Kong Chinese move to and fro surprisingly freely once the communists have granted travel documents. They're coming home to the only human habitation in the world that knows when it must die. In 25 years' time, if the hotline from Peking doesn't ring before then, within a quick quarter of a century, the lease on the new territories expires and 9/10 of this colony will be handed back to China. So this borrowed place lives on borrowed time. The only colony in the world not moving towards independence. For Chairman Mao refused to accept 2 Chinas and had certainly not digest 3. So here's China in a grey flannel suit, an impudent colonial excess upon the communist rump, a wealthy jumble of businessmen's mansions, high-rise hotels and horrible slums. People are the only raw material of this desperate anthill, and almost all of them are refugees. In the past 10 years, more than 250,000 mainland Chinese have escaped into Hong Kong, joining the 21 million overseas Chinese who prefer to admire their motherland from a distance. They're still arriving at a rate of 15,000 a year. Most of them choose the treacherous short crossings at Deep Bay and Mears Bay. The Hong Kong government, walking on eggs, never publicises the delicate issue of such illegals. But each year, during the 8 months of warm seas, thousands of freedom swimmers risk their lives in these dark waters. Last year, 6,000 surrendered to the police. But for everyone intercepted, 2 or 3 must surely slip in undetected. A maritime police dawn patrol under Superintendent Bill Bailey reaches Mears Bay, the shortest distance between 2 worlds. China, on the left, of course, and Hong Kong's outer island of Peng Chau, population 28. Although it's only just over a mile, it's still a hell of a swim for them. These are what? These are country boys, boys put onto the farms. They're not trained athletes.
They're not trained athletes, no, but they're young, they're very fit. I think they must practice to swim. And they usually have a football bladder or something like this in a net or a football itself. and they hang on to this and float across, paddling, dog paddling, working their way down the coast until they get to the nearest point and then swimming across to Peng Chau.
So the other thing is that apart from the swim, they've got the patrols to worry about, haven't they?
Well, this is their main concern over the other side. They've got to run the gauntlet from whichever area in China they've come from. They work their way down to this area, but they're mainly concerned, their biggest worry, are the guards in this area.
Now one can't see, through the binoculars, one can't see evidence of any military posts over there. There's just that one there that doesn't seem to be used.
Well, their lookout post, there's one over there which is fairly new, and the other one that's been there for some time.
Now somebody will be watching us now, presumably.
Presumably, yes.
Well, they have to swim at night, and they have to swim when there's no moon.
These are the favoured times, and also at neap tides as opposed to spring tides. They come across when the tide is low. They haven't got so far to swim. Where you've got the bigger tides, of course, there's a danger of them being swept out to sea, and this does happen.
So this is the beach where they come ashore?
Yes, this is the normal area they land from China.
And what sort of evidence do you find that they've been here?
We usually check the beach early in the morning. Bare footprints, sometimes air cushions, football bladders. They usually discard these when they land on the beach and then go in and hide.
Who are they hiding from?
Well, I suppose it's sort of inherent for fear of still being caught.
Yeah.
So they don't take any chances. So they hide. They also look for clothing. And quite often they just go to sleep.
I suppose if you're alive after swimming that way, you're relieved enough to relax. When do they pluck up enough courage to come down and give themselves up?
They usually wait until the sun is well up. And if they see a police launch coming in, then they come down to meet us.
And what's the reaction when they see you?
Relieved.
They're not frightened they're going to be arrested and interrogated and then put back across the frontier again?
No, it would indicate that they have some prior knowledge of what to expect when they arrive in Hong Kong.
Do you think there's a pipeline? Do you think they're being fed through by some sort of organisation?
I don't think it's organised. I'm sure they hear rumours from visitors to China from Hong Kong, just what they can expect on arrival here.
They're going to expect good treatment and they're going to be set free?
Yes.
Now, you've had one or two people here who've picked up bodies and that sort of thing.
Yes, we get the occasional body washed up, usually fairly decomposed, obviously having been in the water some time. Fortunately, not very often, but we do get the odd one.
What about women? Women do this swim as well, I believe.
Yes, I should say roughly 1, 2 in 10 are women.
It's a bad enough swim for a man. I mean, I don't know how women do it, especially a little Chinese girl.
They always seem to be fitter than the men in actual fact. They seem to have far more stamina.
There don't seem to be any Chinese communist patrol boats over there, so once they're in the sea and swimming, they should be safe enough if they can just keep afloat.
There are no military vessels, but there are the commune boats, which during the day are fishing boats. But I'm not so sure that's all they do. I believe that they do patrol up and down at night time and will pick them out of the water if they find them.
And arrest them, I mean?
Well, I say arrest and take them back.
Take them back?
Yeah.
I wonder what happens to them then.
Well, I think they're sent to correctional sort of institute and then released again. It's, we picked up one who'd been arrested 3 times. They're not particularly badly treated.
They're not?
No, it's more of a political sort of correction than anything else.
And what actually happens to them? You've put them back on your launch, you take them back to your headquarters, then what?
Well, we take them back, from the Marines' point of view, we take them back to Tai Po Gao, which is our base. They are then collected and taken to Yuen Long Police Station, where they are interrogated, processed, and then after several days, they are released.
Here comes a shattering moment in the lives of last night's freedom swimmers who've just surrendered to a police patrol. They could hardly face a more complete change of life if they'd come from Mars. And behind the frightened but impassive swimmers, shepherded by plainclothes police, a love story.
They came from Tongkun and they walked 4 nights to the border, then swim across the bay, about a mile or 2. The lady doesn't know how to swim, and it's this man that bring him across. They want to get better life in Hong Kong. They intended to get married. They try to make money in Hong Kong and then send the money back to their parents. And the parents will then consent for them to get married. They came by boat all the way from Canton, down the river. It took them 2 days. They landed at Castle Peak. They can get a better living condition in Hong Kong. They're farmers in Canton.
Some hide their faces, fearing communists may retaliate by punishing relatives still within China.
We used to be students in Canton. In fact, this man finished his university degree and he couldn't find a job in China. He tried to get a better living and he didn't want to be a farmer. That's why he made up his mind to come.
At immigration headquarters, another group of freedom swimmers is briefed about life in a democracy. The head of immigration, Bill Collard, must cope with this illegal flood.
It's been building up, in fact, over the last couple of years, partly, I think, as a result of the Cultural Revolution in China, when large numbers of youths were sent down to the countryside to work in the agricultural communes. And I think that when they were sent down in 1966, after the Cultural Revolution, they thought they would eventually get back to school and to university, and so stuck it out for a couple of years. But when the schools reopened about a year or so ago, and they found they weren't going to go back to school as they'd hoped, then they became restless and discontented with the very uncongenial life on the commune. It's very unpleasant work and hard work, and they're not used to it. And I think this inspired a lot of them to decide to leave China and come to Hong Kong. But certainly the numbers over the last 4 or 5 months have been quite high. We've been arresting or intercepting something like 500 a month, and working on the basis we catch 1 in 2 or 1 in 2.5, which is the ratio we normally employ. This means that something well over 1,000 of these people have been coming in each month for the last 4 or 5 months.
It seems rather a hazardous adventure for them.
Well, yes, it's rather more than I'd care to do, I must confess.
They've got currents and they've got the occasional shark, I suppose, or garupa. That's
well, we've had one case where a youngster was taken by a shark or barracuda. He lost a leg. There have been cases of people being in the water 7 or 8 hours, and a couple of years ago there was a very tragic case of a girl who was escaping with her boyfriend, and they got her halfway across Deep Bay and he lost consciousness, and she towed him the rest of the way across the bay and was in the water for quite a long time. But unfortunately, when they eventually picked up or staggered ashore, I forget which now, the boy was dead, and it was a very particularly tragic case.
I wonder what's happened to her.
Oh, she remained here and she's been assimilated in the population.
Has there been a changed reaction, do you detect, by the Chinese communists to these people who are escaping? Are they tending to let them go, not bother about them, or have they strengthened the guards?
There's certainly no evidence that they're turning a blind eye, and one assumes that they do their best to prevent these people from escaping from China.
You don't think they might be saying good riddance to wrong-thinking rubbish?
It's a possibility, certainly, yes.
Now, are there people who are voting with their feet? Are they anti-Mao? Do they just want a better life? They just want to complete their education?
No, not at all. They're not politically motivated at all in their escapes. Education is what they want above all. They're not greatly interested in working. And of course, the age group, most of them are between about 18 and 24 years of age, predominantly male. And they've had a little education in China, not very much, and certainly not enough to normally fit them into our Hong Kong educational system.
Yet they regard themselves perhaps as the academics and the intellectuals of the communist world.
Not academics. They certainly regard themselves as intellectuals because they have had some education. Admittedly, in many cases it's pretty rudimentary, but having had some education, they do tend to regard themselves as being a little better than the average chap.
Which they were.
Which they were, perhaps, but is no longer true. And I think they find this a bit of a shock, too.
See, it's extraordinary. They're leaving a communist commune, and they're coming to the asphalt jungle to surpass all, aren't they? They're coming to the place where competition is hardest.
It's a very traumatic experience for many of them, adjusting to life in a highly developed industrial city like Hong Kong after living in these very remote communes, either on the farms or the fishing villages.
And I mean, 3 or 4 million city-bred Chinese, a lot of whom speak English, who are used to this kind of temper, they must be absolutely overawed, are they not?
Oh, they are. They're completely at sea. They don't know what to do or where to go. They had to be taught the most elementary things about shown films, for instance, on how to queue for a bus and how to go on the ferry and this sort of thing, because they just have no experience whatsoever of this sort of life. It's a completely different life for them.
How are they affected by the life here? What does it do to them?
It doesn't do much for them. Normally, when they come in, they're pretty fit. You know, they're bursting with health, and they've had a healthy outdoor life, plenty of exercise, a good diet, and so on. And I think, generally speaking, their health does tend to deteriorate. Life in a big city doesn't suit them. And this is not a good thing, of course, but there's nothing we can do about that. They exchange one way of life for another, and there are bound to be problems arising from this.
As the editor of Hong Kong's main Chinese language newspaper well knows, you're from Shanghai, so you've been a refugee yourself.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about these thousands of illegals that are coming in here? Do you think the colony is too overcrowded already?
Well, in the first place, Alan, this place, if it hadn't for the refugees, it wouldn't have been any place at all. You see, the refugees came in not only with their capital, but their management expertise and so on and so forth. And if they work as a dishwasher in a restaurant, neither you nor I could tell that 5-10 years later they wouldn't own a restaurant, and the next generation, own a chain of restaurants. This is a strange thing. We Chinese people, if a rickshaw puller, the greatest ambition is to own that rickshaw. Having owned one rickshaw, you wanted to own 2. And he's still living that, what you call a hovel. But by the time he owned, they say about 6 rickshaws, he said, maybe I should move out to a place where you could have 3 families living there instead of 5. There have been several newspaper stories saying that these low-rent resettlement areas are the breeding grounds of millionaires and where our traffic problems originated because there are too many cars owned by people who live in the resettlement areas.
Every 3rd person lives in such an area, for in the last 25 years the population's increased 7 times. Every year, Hong Kong must build homes for an extra 80,000 people just to keep pace. It's like creating a new Doncaster or Watford each year. So you can see how they feel about the annual arrival of 15,000 illegals. After such an exodus from the mainland, most Chinese, who make up 98% of the colony's 4 millions, most are anti-communist or at least non-communist. They came for a better life and whatever they've found, they don't want to go back. In their speck of Asia, one of the world's richest nations, exporting more than India, some have made good, some not. But even the poorest squatters live better than they would in Jakarta or Calcutta or probably in Shanghai. But it's no welfare state. Free schooling's only just been introduced, a mere 15,000 families receive assistance, and there are no pensions or unemployment benefits. In Hong Kong, if you don't work, you don't eat. There's one place, right in the heart of this colony, that not only the freedom swimmers, but the police avoid. And this is it, the walled city of Kowloon. 6 acres of festering slum with 20,000 people who so far have refused resettlement because they regard it as a piece of China, a piece of the mainland. This is a sort of Far Eastern Casbah where children are tied to stone ledges to prevent them falling into the open sewers. It's a place of excretia and rats, of violence, of brothels, of heroin divans as they're called, of every sort of viciousness and villainy. And if it's a place that the police have refused to come into, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. triad gangsters rule this cesspit, and whenever the government attempts to rebuild its stinking hovels, their secret societies unite with the communists in denouncing British colonial trespass. So, because of some lawyer's loophole in the old treaty, the walled city is still under Peking's jurisdiction. It's outside the law, but not outside the reach of that breed of valiant old English ladies who can outface gangsters by sheer goodness. A missionary who's pushing 90, Mrs. Gladys Donithorne's been in China since 1919. What made you decide to come to the walled city in the first place?
Well, we were having some meetings just outside, and one woman came, and she was very much interested in hearing about the gospel of the Lord Jesus, and she became a Christian. And she said to me, would you come and visit, come to my home? So I said, I'd like to very much, but where is your home? And she said, well, you won't find it yourself. I'll meet you. And she met me right outside and brought me in. That was my first introduction to it.
If this is the kind of place that even the police are frightened to come into, how did the people of the walled city accept you?
Well, I prayed very much about it. You see, we are Christians, and we were doing this work for God, not just for ourselves. And I asked him to open up a way. And it was put into my heart to open a milk bar, so they would have something for nothing. And that's what we did. And we used to have a lot of people come for milk, not here, to another place, every day, and we gave them milk and biscuits. So we got in touch with families that way.
What do you think they thought of you at first, then?
They thought I was a spy from the police, but they couldn't make me out quite. I came by myself, especially, so that the people couldn't say that they were afraid of me or anything, you see. I was afraid of being here sometimes.
Really? Really?
Well, it was very bad. The conditions were very bad then. The people were largely drug addicts, and there were people who took drugs, and then they died on the streets. We walked along, and there were little opium bars and people taking heroin either side in those narrow lanes there, you see.
Now, what about the rats and the open sewers?
They're like, the rats are just like kittens. Some are, at night time they run over your feet.
Gangsters also run over your feet in this odious thieves' kitchen, as we discovered. But you're reasonably safe in daylight in the street of dentists just outside. Though it's almost as fearsome. In every shop there's a dentist chair. But the terrible whine of a dozen drills is drowned by happier sounds from Auntie Donnie's school full of 350 tots, born in this most desperate of anthills, but still with that winsome brand of Chinese charm. Good morning. So, for various reasons, many Chinese struggle to get into Hong Kong, while others must queue, must wait, to get out, to get back to China. The Chinese have their dying houses, where the old and the sick go to spare their families the bad luck that would befall them should they die at home. So, in the coffin home, the dead await transportation back to China for burial in the land of their birth. Some of these coffins are already wrapped up in brown paper and addressed. All must await permission from Peking before they can travel, and that permission was last granted in 1951, more than 20 years ago. There are 305 coffins and tin boxes filled with ashes in this home, and the oldest inhabitant's been waiting since 1906. It seems that frontiers are not free and open, not even for the dead. And not even when dead are all men equal. For the poorer wait in their coffins in these dormitories, paying a rent of 30 pence a month, while the richer pay £1 a month and wait in their coffins in single rooms.